during the war.
Everybody involved in the production at AIP had to be creative, really creative. I needed a shot of a landing craft going in on a landing. So we went up to the base up in Ventura, which is a CB base. I told the man we were making a training film at the gate, and he let us in. I requisitioned the hose from some sailor walking out, can you get me a garden hose? Turned on the water. We had the camera out here, and I was sprinkling the water like this as the waves were going up and down. And that's how we got the thing going into the beach. And in the picture, we used stock footage. So here's the landing craft. The next thing we cut to is a bunch of stock footage, everybody going into the beach. But that's what I'm saying. We used ingenuity. And I think, to tell you the truth, that was the basis of really, in those days, of making pictures on the money we had.
And that's how you did it in those days. You didn't throw money at the screen like they do today. You don't throw $20 million, $50 million, $100 million at the screen, which is unmitigated bullshit. Oh, I shouldn't use that word, okay.
By the end of their first year in business, Sam and Jim were flying by the seat of their pants through a Hollywood that had yet to notice them. Making just enough off one movie to finance the next, they were having a ball. The movies may have been cheap and the storylines ludicrous, but they were about to discover an audience that couldn't care less. And Hollywood would never be the same again.
In the home theater that he built in 1957, Arkoff had his son Louis work as the projectionist and his daughter Donna rewind the film reels. Fittingly, both children grew up to become Hollywood producers. We'll be back with more on AMC's Hollywood Lives and Legends. Now back to more on AMC's Hollywood Lives and Legends.
I realized one thing. Nobody ever talked about teenage pictures. Even the great Disney considered children to be up to the age of marriage. They would make a picture about Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn. Well, Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn were great, but they were about as far from a 20th century teenagers as you can get. So then we started to make teenage pictures.
Honey, I wish your father hadn't bought you that stupid car. Besides it being dangerous, it's unfeminine.
American International really understood, better than the major studios, the teen market. This was a period of time where parents didn't understand their kids. There was a rebellion going on that the only time kids could really address each other were at school or when they could get out of the house. AIP understood this.
I'm just a clean-living, fun-loving American delinquent.
When AIP discovered teenagers, they tapped into a Hollywood goldmine. Ignored by the majors and patronized by television, teenagers were hungry for movies that showed them the way they wanted to be, cool, rebellious, and sexy. It was a discovery that would transform the motion picture industry and give birth to an audience with an insatiable appetite for entertainment.
What is happening to the younger generation of today, Nick?
Rock and roll movies and juvenile delinquency movies. That's what they started making. And most of the major studios didn't want to make those pictures. You see a niche that isn't being filled, you slip into it. And that's what they did, and they started cranking out these pictures for teenagers.
Sam and Jim had teenagers of their own and knew firsthand how little it took to keep a young audience happy. They had their writers hammer out stories about race cars, rock and roll, and drugs, all of which seemed a million miles from the Leave It to Beaver teenager you could see on TV. Kids loved them, but parents were outraged. And with each new release, the controversy over AIP films increased.
The strength, the security, and the future of America depend upon the character and the quality of our youth.
FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover led a move by prominent political leaders to censor the growing tide of juvenile delinquency pictures. But despite their protests, Sam and Jim kept finding more and more ways to push teenagers' hot buttons.
They came up with this notion of double features. I think they felt that audiences wouldn't necessarily pay first-run prices to see just one of their movies, but they might in order to see two of their movies on the same double feature.
Sets of two. Two monster movies, two drag strip movies. One drag strip movie and one monster movie. One teenage delinquent sorority girl and one monster movie. And I mean, there were ants and lizards and scorpions. Boy, I didn't want to miss any of them.
By releasing their movies as double features, Sam and Jim guaranteed themselves a percentage of the box office take. Now they were poised to capitalize on the success of their movies, and in 1957, they did just that. I Was a Teenage Werewolf became an instant cult classic, making over $2 million in its first 2 weeks. Introducing a young Michael Landon to teenage audiences, the film made headlines from coast to coast. And, for an instant, Sam and Jim were the talk of the town.
That time was called Teenage Werewolf. Jim Nicholson came up with I Was A. And then it was I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and all the comedians, Bob Hope, Jack Benny, everybody was making fun of the title.
Remember how wonderful it was when you sprang and suddenly dug in with your fangs, a soft throat, the gush of warm blood? No!
We made the picture in 7 days, costing under $150,000.
This high school boy, a teenage werewolf.
In 2 weeks, we grossed over $2 million. Well, what a windfall for AIP, the new young company. Unbelievable. And theater circuit owners were calling, to AIP. Do you have another one? Do you have another one like that?
Werewolf, meet Frankenstein. Shake hands and come out snarling.
I said, well, I could do a Teenage Frankenstein. He said, great.
Professor Frankenstein, who creates out of human parts the most terrifying creature to walk the earth today.
To capitalize on the success of Teenage Werewolf, Sam and Jim's production machine went into overdrive, cranking out 50 films by the end of 1958. It was a pace that even MGM, at the height of production, could barely equal.
He wanted to dig that crazy scenery, man.
AIP's teenage double features were talking to kids in their own language, from the front rows of movie houses to the back seats of cars.
Let's go to a drive-in.
Oh, the time is now, the time is here. Now's the time for a bite of cheer. A tasty light where the price is right. Well, look here, you'll dig this sight.
Drive-in theaters essentially provided legalized parking for people who wanted to neck and make out. And when I was growing up, that was the real reason you wanted to go there. You didn't really even care what was showing. Nobody cared. It's kind of a safe, fun, silly dating experience, and I think it was the cornerstone of American International's audience.
I don't think a lot of parents really ended up taking their kids to AIP movies because I remember mine certainly balked at the whole concept. So basically they were date movies, and the scarier the picture was, the more jumps there were, then the more you were supposed to get glommed onto.
Baby, won't you let me get to know you? Put my loving arms around you. Let me, baby, let me do. Let me, baby. Darling, won't you let me have your number? We could go and dance La Bamba. Let me, baby, let me do.
With drive-in audiences screaming for more monster movies, Sam and Jim needed to find a monster maker who wouldn't be scared away by AIP's low budgets, which led them to an eccentric local artist named Paul Blaisdell and his assistant, Bob Burns.
Well, when Paul was building these things, budget was the number one thought in everybody's mind, like there wasn't any. And so he had to take shortcuts in building these things. And like, for instance, on the she creature here, the way that the antennas here were made, he used candles, cut the candles into this design, and then put a wire coat hanger inside and glued them on, and that's what these were. And then the teeth down here were actually teeth from a magic store. So a lot of stuff that Paul did was stuff like right off the rack, you might say, of just doing things.
Even psychiatrists say that in all these monster pictures, there's not only entertainment, but for some people, therapy.
You know, I did a picture for this company called It Conquered the World.
I hate your living guts for what you've done to my husband and my world. I know you for the coward you are, and I'm going to kill you.
Do you hear that? I'm gonna kill you.
It's noon one day, and Roger says to me, "Would you like to see the monster?" I said, "Oh, Roger, I'd love to see the monster. I mean, I don't do that scene until the end. Oh, I'd love to see the monster."
Now this is Beulah, the cucumber monster, as we used to call her, from It Conquered the World. Now this, of course, is a very small model of it that was made in Japan.
That's the monster? You gotta be kidding! I mean, all of us are thinking monster. We're not thinking about this little Meshuggah down here. I mean, you could kick this thing and it'd fall over. It's terrible.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
Roger Corman, at the last minute, decided he wanted it to come out of the cave in the film. It was never supposed to come out of the cave originally. It was built